Hey everybody, how you doing today? Welcome, 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 welcome. So glad to be here with all of you. It's going to be a great conversation tonight. We have a lot of things to discuss. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be awesome. Thank you for your patience. Sorry we started a little bit late. Just had to get everything all set up. As you can see, we have the famous bookshelf behind us tonight. We're going to do a great show tonight, great late night conversation, talk about different things. So,
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just it's a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
all right. Welcome, everybody. So glad to have you with us here tonight. Welcome, 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 welcome. So glad to have you with us. So glad to be here with all of you. It's going to be a great conversation. Now, the way I generally do things is I give my opening remarks, and my opening remarks are followed by a roll call where we find out who's on the other side of the camera. And my roll call is followed by answering your super chat questions. And that's how we do it. I answer your super chat questions for the remainder of the show. So if there's something you want me to talk about tonight, just shoot me a super chat and I will do my best to answer it in the second half of our program. That's how these things work. So welcome everybody. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Always good to hit the notifications bell. And if there's something you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, just send me a super chat. I will write it down. And I will make a point of answering it in the second half of the show. So a few news updates. At this point, the Ukrainian president, Vladimir Zelensky, is saying that Russia is in the middle of a second offensive to take back Donbass. And Russia's not confirming that, but it appears that there is an escalation of Russian military action to move in and protect the peoples of the Donetsk People's Republic and the Lugansk People's Republic. That seems to be underway. Is Ilhan Omar's bill to join the International Criminal Court good, bad, or distraction? All right. Join ICC, good, bad, or distraction. Important to talk about what's really going on because the peoples in Donetsk and Lugansk have been living under 8 years of hell. The United States toppled the Ukrainian government in 2014 and installed a fanatically anti-Russian government. That anti-Russian government carried out the horrendous Odessa massacre. And then after that, that horrific Ukrainian regime has engaged in shelling of Donetsk and Lugansk, has engaged in a food blockade, has punished people in that region for speaking their own language. And Russia facilitated the Minsk agreements to try and enable these folks that are in the eastern regions of Ukraine to be reintegrated back into Ukrainian society. A treaty was made, and that treaty was not fulfilled. And after 8 years of bombing, 8 years of shelling, 14,000 plus people killed, Russia has decided enough is enough, and they're moving in to protect the peoples of the Donbass region. And that's what's going on here. You won't hear that on mainstream media. They make it sound like it's all just Russia engaging in conquest, Russian imperialism. But no, this is an 8-year conflict, and it has certainly escalated now that Russia, a major country, is involved. But it didn't start recently, didn't start in the last few months. It started 8 years ago when the USA toppled the Ukrainian government. It could have ended by simply fulfilling the Minsk agreements, which the Ukrainian government, at the behest of the United States, refused to do. And so the conflict in Ukraine continues, and Zelensky needs to negotiate and stop, playing politics with the lives of his people. He needs to let the peoples of the eastern regions, who he doesn't want to let back into Ukraine as equal citizens, he needs to let them join with Russia, let them have their independence. Thoughts on Biden's imaginary handshake? Oh boy. This mic. Can you hear me, folks? Can you hear me? Are we getting audio? Yes, we are. Very good. Sorry about that. The mic went off there for a second. Wrote it down, the super chat, Biden's imaginary handshake. And the peoples of Donetsk and Lugansk are being protected by Russia. Russia is moving in. And now the United States has armed these vicious forces, the Azov Battalion, the horrendous Azov Battalion. This is basically the ISIS of Ukraine. These are brutal torture killing squads, fanatical, hateful super soldiers. This is a Sorelian counter gang, a group of hateful fanatics who've been cultivated by American intelligence to go in and murder people. And the United States has been planning for a long-term war in Ukraine. And, if you really care about the Ukrainian people, you'd want to bring this conflict to an end. You wouldn't be trying to turn their country into a long-term battlefield against Russia. So that's important to be aware of. Rev Patriot and Rev Nationalist Alliance. Okay. So that's something to be aware of. It's also important to note, while we're talking about this, that that Putin came out today and he pointed out that the economic blitzkrieg against Russia launched by the United States has failed. The United States tried to just wreck Russia's economy, cause panic on the markets. They took a bunch of dramatic, sudden moves to hurt Russia's economy. And the idea was to create so much instability and weaken Russia. And it didn't happen. And now Russia seems to have collected itself. Their economy is now stabilizing in the aftermath of the economic blitzkrieg from the United States. But now the boomerang has come back around. The boomerang has come back around, and it's the United States that is having massive prices of fuel. It's the United States that is having massive rise in food prices. And on top of that, we got European countries that are doing crazy, insane things. We got, the leaders of some European countries are telling people to skip showers. Don't shower because if you shower, that heat for your hot water, that's dependence on Russian natural gas. There's a good chance that Marine Le Pen may be the next president of France. And that appears a very big possibility. And that will be most likely because Marine Le Pen is less pro-NATO and less pro-European Union and less interested in cooperating with the United States in their hostility to Russia. So that's happening, right? And I was just getting to, Gonzalo Lira. This is the journalist, Gonzalo Lira, who's been reporting from Ukraine, seems to be missing, and we don't know where he's at. George Galloway has highlighted this case, and other people are asking, where is he? He's been doing great reporting from Ukraine, and he seems to be missing. So I wanted to highlight that. Look into the case of Gonzalo Lira. I looked at it last night. People raised it on the stream. I looked into it. I'd seen a number of his videos. I just didn't remember his name, Gonzalo Lira. Now this guy's missing. This guy could be being tortured. This guy could be being killed. And there's a good chance that if these extremists, if they've gotten their hands on him, which is a real possibility, right? They've arrested anybody who has the slightest sympathy for Russia and Ukraine. If this journalist, Gonzalo Lira, is in their hands, this may be the last we ever hear of him. And it's really horrendous that people are being disappeared and that, they've outlawed all the socialist groups in Ukraine. They've outlawed the communist groups. They've arrested all the opposition political figures. But Nazis are openly part of the military. And, that Zelensky likes Nazis so much, he brought one of them to the Greek parliament to give a speech recently. He was on Fox News, and they asked him about the Azov Battalion, and he confirmed that they exist, right? Well, U.S. mainstream media says it's a conspiracy theory. Well, the Ukrainian president admitted exactly what they were when he appeared on television. So, we know what's going on here. We've been telling you the truth. Mainstream media has been lying to you. The biolabs, right? We now know the biolabs are a reality. The USA and the Pentagon and the Biden family had laboratories in Ukraine that were engaging in some kind of research. And we've seen the clip of Victoria Nuland. Yeah, I mean, the biolabs are a reality. Everything I've told you about the Ukraine conflict has turned out to be true. Everything, right? I told you that Russia had no intention of invading Ukraine, and that they were basically, the United States was piling weapons into Ukraine and trying to provoke the situation. And ultimately, as Russia was moving their troops away from the border, there was about to be a slaughter, like an onslaught against the people of eastern Ukraine. And so Russia moved in after recognizing their independent republics at their request. They moved in to protect the people. I told you the bulk of the fighting is happening in Donbass, right? In the regions, that want their independence from Ukraine. That's where the bulk of the fighting is happening. I told you about the biolabs. I told you about Hunter Biden's laptop years ago. I told you about Hunter Biden's laptop. And yeah, I mean, this is a situation where we have a reality happening before our eyes. And now Gonzalo Lira is in great danger. So, we need to raise awareness about that case, and his safety is something we should all be worried about, right? This is a guy who was telling the truth. The Ukrainian government's not disappearing the CNN reporters that are covering up and helping their lies. It's not disappearing the MSNBC or BBC reporters, but it's going after anyone who dares tell the truth about what's happening in the country. And I saw some of his videos early on during this conflict, and I could tell this guy was telling the truth, and now he's missing. It's very terrifying. It's very, very, very terrifying to see what's happening to him. It's utterly terrifying. Just utterly terrifying. Utterly terrifying. So, just thought I would raise that. Now, I wanted to talk about some other things here tonight, right? Now that we've talked about how basically the economic blitzkrieg is coming around and attacking the United States, I want to talk about Chris Smalls. Have you all been following the case of Chris Smalls? Chris Smalls is the leader of the Staten Island Amazon Workers Union. He's an African-American man who is an organizer. And he's organized the people of Staten Island, the Amazon workers, into a union. He's a militant. He's a real working class fighter. And now there's an article that has come up in Dissident Voice, which is an online publication. And I'm really glad I caught this. I have a lot of Google alerts for different obscure topics that are of interest to all of us, right? And this is an article from Dissident Voice, The Amazon Labor Union Victory, Lessons for All Workers by Ed Greister, is the article. It starts out in one of the most remarkable labor organizing victories in decades. The Amazon workers in Staten Island voted to unionize with the independent Amazon Labor Union. That's independent, not AFL-CIO, independent, right? This is the first organizing victory for any union at any of Amazon's 110 warehouses across the USA, the nation's second largest employer of over 1 million employees. This was a real bottom-up organizing effort, potentially highlighting an effective way forward for the rest of labor. A great victory that gives momentum to workers not only in the other Amazon warehouses, but in all industries. And it demonstrates how and why rank-and-file workers are the essential elements of not only a successful organizing drive, but critical to a revitalization of the labor movement based on struggle. Now, this is what blows my mind. I should read the Financial Times more often because I did not see this coming. In a remarkable moment of candor, the Financial Times, that's the main, financial paper. It's like the Wall Street Journal of Britain. It's a little bit deeper than the Wall Street Journal, but it's the financial paper. Financial Times of London is the full name of it. Financial Times, which always speaks for big business, admits Amazon workers took great inspiration. Get ready for this. Amazon workers took great inspiration from none other than legendary communist William Z. Foster. Did you all hear that? People who are familiar with this program should go, holy shit. They should be going, holy shit, right now. That's what they should be doing right now. Ever read Heidegger's work or Kant? War Against White People in South Africa. I'll write them both down. All right. I've read Heidegger, Kant, War Against White People in South Africa. Oh boy. All right. It's one of those nights, huh? You know? Right. Anyway. In a remarkable moment of candor, the Financial Times, which always speaks for big business, admits that Amazon's workers took great inspiration from none other than legendary communist William Z. Foster. I have been talking on these streams about William Z. Foster for months and months and months. I have made videos. There's a video that I did with Brent Langle called called The Legend of William Z. Foster. I am a William Z. Foster fan, if there ever was one. For years, going back like almost a decade, I have been promoting William Z. Foster, the great American communist leader, the leader of the Communist Party during the 1930s, the leader of the Great Steel Strike of 1919, the anti-revisionist and hardliner in the aftermath of the Khrushchev revelations. And I've been telling you all, William Z. Foster, William Z. Foster, William Z. Foster. I've been telling you all about this. And now the ruling class, Stacey Abrams' favorite book being Atlas Shrugged. All right. I have talked to you about William Z. Foster. I've told you all that the most important book you can read on learning Marxism is The History of the Three Internationals by William Z. Foster. I've been telling you all about William Z. Foster for years. I've been telling you all about William Z. Foster. And now we know that the main source of inspiration for the Union victory that just shocked the whole country at Amazon is who I've been telling you about, William Z. Foster. Now, do you think that these lives aren't having an impact? Do you think that nobody watches these streams, Caleb? Nobody pays attention to what you're doing. You're on here rambling about Marxism. Nobody cares about it. That's all obscure history. Oh, that's just a bunch of white autistic male nerd stuff. Nobody cares about all of this. No, folks. People have been watching these streams. People have been paying attention to what I've said. People have watched the videos I've done about William Z. Foster. People have listened to me as I've read William Z. Foster's writings, as I've popularized. We have been having reading groups around the country in multiple cities now, like at least 8 cities. People have started reading The History of the Three Internationals by William Z. Foster because of these broadcasts, because of the work that the Center for Political Innovation has done to popularize it. You can, in a weird way, folks, yes, we were not involved in the organizing effort. That's true. We were not involved in setting up the union. But the fact that an obscure communist labor leader, a genius, one of the greatest geniuses of the American 20th century, one of the greatest, probably the greatest American communist who ever lived, is being actively studied by the organizers of the Amazon warehouse union. They're studying William Z. Foster. Folks, if they're studying him, they're Googling him. If they're Googling him, they're watching videos. And who has the only video on YouTube about the life of William Z. Foster? This channel does, folks. We are having a big impact. Let me just read you what is in the Financial Times. This is in the Financial Times of London. Quote, Amazon's warehouse in Staten Island is a thoroughly 21st century workplace where human pickers select items from shelves brought onto the floor by robots. Yet, when the newly formed Amazon labor union wanted to unionize the place, they turned to a manual called Organizing Methods in the Steel Industry from 1936. The pamphlet recommends, among other things, a chain system whereby workers recruit other workers. The Amazon workers should look back into the history of the steel industry, as not strange as it might sound. Steel was a vital sector in the American economy, just as it is in e-commerce today. Justine Medina, or Amazon organizer, described Foster's organizing methods in the steel industry as a must-read. So we now know that the textbook that they used to organize the Amazon warehouse successfully, the first Union victory, was done by people doing what I started doing these streams, it was before the pandemic. It was long before the pandemic. I'd only did them on Saturdays, I think. Only did them on Saturdays. And, I flew out to LA. Remember flying out to Los Angeles. We had a small event, and that's, where I met some of the people that helped us set up CPI. And one of the people who came was a worker, a union organizer. And he said, I love your broadcast because you're one of the only people to talk about William Z. Foster. I have been talking about William Z. Foster. Folks, I have a picture. I can't show it to you. Because I can't turn around the camera here. But I actually have a picture of William Z. Foster on my wall. And you know what I'm going to do? Just because I like to do weird theatrical things on these streams, I am going to go get the picture of William Z. Foster that is hanging on my wall. And I'm going to go wave it in front of the camera. All right. This picture is hanging on my wall. This is hanging on my living room wall. You can see the reflection from the ring light I've got shining on my face here. This picture of William Z. Foster is hanging on my wall. It is above my couch. I got a picture of Lenin and Stalin, and I got a picture of William Z. Foster, the greatest American communist who ever lived. I got this hanging on my wall in my living room. That's how important this individual is to what we do here. And the fact that Amazon, what a night. Anyway, the fact that, all right, how do I get back into position here? This is an elaborate thing. I'm not sitting in a chair, folks. I'm sitting on the floor, actually. But the fact that we have been working so hard to publicize a great American labor leader, and the fact that he himself, that very, very labor leader that we have worked so hard to promote, is the source of inspiration for the Amazon workers drive. That is a moment where we can really, really declare victory. I'm not going to tour the apartment tonight. Not going to do it. Right? Isn't that someone's impression of Bush Sr.? Not gonna do it. Wouldn't be prudent. Not gonna do it. But yes, I'm sitting on the floor. Got a stack of pillows to make it more comfortable. Yes, I am wearing pajama pants. You weren't supposed to see that, but I got inspired in the moment to go and get the William Z. Foster picture off the wall, just in a moment of zeal. So there you go. Are you familiar with Mackinder's geographical pivot of history? Is NATO expansion part of the struggle to control the heartland space communist? I am not familiar with Mackinder's geographical pivot of history. Some things I can do, folks, and some things I cannot, and that's how it works. But this is a great moment, right? I mean, we've been promoting William Z. Foster. We have been doing it, and here we are. And I'm going to pull up the video I did, The Legend of William Z. Foster. I did a whole video, The Legend of William Z. Foster. And, I think I'm not going to show the whole video on here, right? Because it's a long piece of video. But I made in the video, and I'm going to see if I can get it to play on here. I made like this opening music that I think would be pretty cool to play on here. So let me see if I can get that for you all. That might be cool. But, William Z. Foster was a really, really amazing labor leader. And I mean, he did amazing, amazing things for the American working class. I'll tell you that much. And he's been forgotten. He's been buried. He should be a household name. Chaya says, William Z. Foster's book made me cry for some reason. Probably the optimism. Well, yeah, and maybe that's where I get it from, right? His book the twilight of world capitalism is dedicated to his grandson, who will live in a socialist United States of America. I mean, this guy was an optimist if there ever was one. He had that Irish. He was born, he was second generation. His father was from Ireland. And there's something, there's that Irish optimism, that, wink and a smile. It's part of Irish culture, right? And that really comes across with William Z. Foster, if ever, right? There's this kind of just a beauty to William Z. Foster. And the fact that he was the source of inspiration for this strike. I mean, that is amazing. And it shows that the work that we are doing, to organize the Center for Political Innovation, to promote William Z. Foster's writing. I mean, this is important stuff that we're doing. I've got up here, I've got William Z. Foster, American Trade Unions, Principles, Strategy, Tactics. Right? What else we got here? We got oh, that's not a William Z. Foster book. What else do we got here? We got his autobiography, From Brian to Stalin. From Brian to Stalin. From Brian to Stalin, William Z. Foster. All right? From Brian to Stalin. All right. Why do you think YouTube is so dominant despite competing platforms? Platforms. All right. I mean, this is a huge victory for what we're about, right? If you're part of this community, you can say that in a small way, you helped to make the Amazon warehouse victory happen. You popularized the guy. You helped popularize and promote a channel that is all about the guy. We have done more to popularize the guy who wrote the manual that made this happen. So that's wild. That's absolutely wild. Salute to Chris Smalls. Chris Smalls is a hero. This guy is a hero of the working class. And you know what the best part is? He went on Tucker Carlson's show. I don't like Tucker Carlson in a lot of ways. Don't agree with him. He's been good on foreign policy, right? He's been more critical of U.S. foreign policy. But the fact that he was willing to go on Tucker Carlson's show. Chris Smalls, I'm sure he's anti-racist. I'm sure he's, I'm sure he's against the mistreatment of women. But he's not a woke, right? He's willing to go. He knows a lot of working people watch Tucker Carlson, so he went on it. Marxist critique of nerd culture. He went on it. And that's really awesome. I mean, that's really, really awesome. I mean, and Chris Smalls, we need to defend Chris Smalls right now. And I mean, I'm talking to people from the Center for Political Innovation. We need to find a way to defend Chris Smalls because the synthetic left is coming after him. The synthetic left is coming after Chris Smalls because he went on the Tucker Carlson show. How dare he? Oh my God. He went on a right-wing network. You can go on MSNBC that's supporting the Azov Battalion. He can go on Fox. He can go on CNN, that's, supporting U.S. imperialism and the Nazis in Ukraine. But how dare he go on a network that is aligned sometimes with conservatives to spread his message? How dare he do that? How dare he criticize AOC? The synthetic left wants to destroy Chris Smalls because they work for Jeff Bezos. The wokeism is not working class and it's not socialist. And it drives me crazy that so many people seem to be under the impression that wokeism is that these wokes, this woke crap, is Marxism. It's not Marxism, right? It is not Marxism. But anyhow, I just want to show you, the music we have here. So
now 50,000 indignant New Yorkers are inside and outside Madison Square Garden in a giant demonstration demanding the veto and defeat of the Taft-Hartley slave labor bill. Ladies and gentlemen, William Z. Foster.
The Wall Street monopolists with their Taft-Hartley bill are trying to split and devitalize and hamstring the trade unions. The Taft-Hartley bill, moreover, would drastically limit the workers' right to strike. It would authorize the president to break national strikes. It would permit employers once again to use strike-breaking injunctions.
Hello.
All right, so that's the opening music. I'm going to play the closing music as well, I think. If I can just get to the closing part of it, right? Okay, and we'll just...
Wall Street, with its fascist-like Taft-Hartley bill, also wants to kill the Communist Party. But they will fail in this as in their other anti-labor objectives. The workers, the American people, need a strong Communist Party, and it will be built despite Wall Street profiteers and exploiters.
You have heard William Z. Foster, chairman of the Communist Party, which purchased the foregoing 15 minutes.
That is our movement, folks. That is our movement. And William Z. Foster is a great figure from U.S. history. And he knew how to organize strikes more than anybody. And the fact that he's involved in this, that his teachings and his labor organizing tactics are being utilized, that is really, really important. It's important for a number of reasons. First of all, just like the synthetic left hates Chris Smalls because he's trying to speak to actual workers, not wokes, the synthetic left hates William Z. Foster. The book Settlers, the mythology of the white proletariat that they promote, it's like a holy book to these wokes. It's a book written by some kind of crazy Maoist third worldist, South African apartheid. It's a book written by some kind of crazy Maoist third worldist. But anarchists like it. It's being published by an anarchist press at this point. Why not call the wokes the evangelical left? And they lie about William Z. Foster in the book. They try to make it sound like William Z. Foster was racist when he talked about how William Z. Foster talked about how one of the weaknesses of the Steelworkers Union, of the United Steelworkers Union, and part of the reason they lost the 1919 strike was racism, that black people were used as scab labor because the Steelworkers Union had a lot of the Steelworkers Unions were racist. And he talks about that, and he says blatantly, yes, we need working class power, David Fox. You are exactly right. All right, we need working class power. And they take a quote from William Z. Foster and they make it sound like he's racist. And they go out of their way to lie about him because they're so threatened by what William Z. Foster was all about. And so just like they've smeared Chris Smalls, now they're going after him. He's a Nazbol. He's evil. He's a fascist. Oh my gosh, how dare he criticize AOC? How dare he go on Tucker, even though he said he has he harbors no grudge against AOC. He wished she'd been there for him. They've gone after William Z. Foster. William Z. Foster, he was from Philadelphia. He was from a working class community in Philadelphia. And William Z. Foster, I'm just going to give you a quick summary of his life. William Z. Foster, he was from a working class community in Philadelphia. And one day he was walking to work and he passed a guy on a soapbox who was a socialist, a soapbox agitator for socialism. And he listened to the guy speaking and he agreed with him. And William Z. Foster had done many different jobs in his life. A sailor, he'd been a sailor. He'd been a delivery man. He had been an assistant. I think his first job is he was the assistant of a sculptor. And he'd done many, many different jobs. And he heard a socialist agitator and he agreed with him. And since he was a traveling worker, he joined the Industrial Workers of the World, the IWW, which was the radical labor union that organized, quote unquote, unskilled workers. Because back then, the American Federation of Labor, the main labor union, would not organize workers they considered to be unskilled. If you were a steel worker, or if you were a coal miner, or if you were a meat packer, or if you had any job, if you were a textile worker that wasn't considered a skilled trade, they wouldn't organize you. So the union for unskilled workers, or industrial workers, they were called, was called the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World, and William Z. Foster joined it. And the IWW was a radical union. It was a syndicalist union, meaning they wanted the workers to seize control of their factories. They didn't believe in voting. They didn't believe in trying to change labor laws. It was all about the struggle of the employer versus the employee, the workers on the job. And it was a militant union. William Z. Foster, because he'd been won to socialism by hearing that soapbox agitator, because he'd been won to socialism, he joined the IWW. And the IWW, they used to engage in free speech fights. They would go to a town and they would have speeches, giving speeches, and the local police would arrest them. And so then all the wobblies from all over the country would go to that town and one by one get arrested. And, and pretty soon the town's jails would be full and there'd be all kinds of radicals from all over the country piling into this one town. The town would change the law and allow there to be, free socialist agitation and labor organizing. It was called the free speech fight. And so William Z. Foster was part of a lot of these big free speech fights that the IWW did. But one thing that William Z. Foster realized was that the American Federation of Labor, the AFL, the main union, had a lot more money and resources and had a lot more people in it. And the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World, was very isolated. And so William Z. Foster and his allies, they joined the American Federation of Labor, but they formed a faction within it. And that faction that they formed was called the Syndicalist League of North America. All right. Once you said you're not a dogmatic man, what criticisms of ML do you have? Do you have? And he formed the Syndicalist League of North America. And they were a group of radicals that infiltrated the AFL. And with the Syndicalist League of North America, they set up shop in Chicago. And in Chicago, they unionized the meatpacking workers. The meatpacking houses of Chicago, the stock houses, were notorious. There'd be workers from Ireland, workers from Eastern Europe, workers from Italy, African Americans who'd come up from the South, and they would be viciously exploited in these packing houses. They would they'd pack meat, and they were just treated awful. And so William Z. Foster, and he organized with the AFL, with his faction of the AFL, he organized the meatpacking houses of Chicago, and it was a big success. The Stockyards Labor Council was created by William Z. Foster. He was a brilliant organizer. And then from there, he organized the steel workers of the country, and he led, almost as like a military commander, he directed the Great Steel Strike of 1919. That's an odd question. Wrote it down. All right. And he organized the Great Steel Workers Strike of 1919. And he organized it, and it failed largely. It was a huge strike. 365,000 workers went on strike, but it failed. And the reason it failed was because the reformist labor leaders didn't support it. It failed because the African American community didn't support it, and largely was because so many of the steel workers unions were racist. The African American community was willing to work as scab labor, and so it failed because of racism, and it failed. And so after the steel workers strike of 1919 failed, William Z. Foster, he went to the Soviet Union, and he met with Lenin. And he found out that Lenin had been urging the Communist Party of the United States to support the strike, that a lot of the communists had this sectarian attitude, that they didn't support the strike because it wasn't led by a communist union. If it had been the IWW, they would have supported it, but because it was led by the AFL, American Federation of Labor, they didn't support the strike. But Lenin had been urging the American communists not to have that attitude, to support all unions against the bosses. And so because of that, William Z. Foster was won to the communist position, and he joined the Communist Party. And he was one of the early leaders of the Communist Party in the 1920s. And then, when Stalin became the leader of the Soviet Union and the Communist International, when Stalin made clear it was time to fight against the reformist labor leaders and fight the reformist labor leaders, that preach socialism but practice fascism. The third period line came in 1928. William Z. Foster supported that. And Jay Lovestone didn't. Jay Lovestone was his rival, and Jay Lovestone was kicked out, and William Z. Foster became the face of American communism. And he ran for president in 1932 on a communist platform. And he built unemployment councils of the unemployed. That's some of in the video that I just showed you, fighting for their rights. And he went around, giving speeches. And he was a tanky if there ever was one. He wrote a book called Toward Soviet America, all about what the United Soviet States of America, the USSA, would be like. And William Z. Foster was the face of communism in America in the early 1930s. And he went from town to town, from city to city, building this communist movement that was supporting the unions, that was unionizing workers in the South, textile workers, and organizing, sharecroppers, and organizing miners and meat packers. And I mean, he was the face of American communism. And he was arrested over and over and over again in almost every city. Don't say gay, Bill. All right. Almost every city he went to. He would organize, and he would be arrested. And he was arrested many times. And by the end of his 1932 presidential campaign, he had a massive heart attack, and he had to go to the Soviet Union to recover and get medical care. And so he went to the Soviet Union, and this guy named Earl Browder, who was not a revolutionary, was a reformist, took over the Communist Party and started toning down the revolutionary message. And he came back from the Soviet Union, and Earl Browder was this kind of corrupt politician, this scheming guy who was really more loyal to the Democrats and Roosevelt than he was to communism. And Earl Browder, did a lot to marginalize William Z. Foster. But even still, in 1937, you had the sit-down strike wave, where workers all over the country occupied their factories. And William Z. Foster, he was the main inspiration. I mean, he was directing the Communist Party's labor wing during the great 1937 sit-down strike wave. And that's how we got auto workers in unions. And that's how steel workers were ultimately unionized, was this labor upsurge in 1937, 1938, 1939. There was this huge labor upsurge. That was William Z. Foster. It was William Z. Foster who was doing that. And that move, that William Z. Foster, ultimately, that's why we used to have good paying jobs in Ohio and Pennsylvania and Kentucky. It was William Z. Foster who built those unions and led the Communist Party. After World War II, Earl Browder dissolved the Communist Party, and he changed it to the Communist Political Association. And he said that the Soviet Union and the USA were going to be best friends forever. William Z. Foster said, no, U.S. imperialism is the main enemy of the people of the world. And so he led the Communist Party's rank and file and the labor union leaders to overthrow Earl Browder. And they toppled Earl Browder. And Mao sent William Z. Foster a telegram congratulating him for defeating the reformist Earl Browder. And William Z. Foster became the leader of the Communist Party during the McCarthy period, during the witch hunt. And he led the Communist Party to restore their support for Black nationalism and their support for the Black Belt. And he wrote a history of the African-American people in the United States and their struggle for freedom. It's a beautiful book. He wrote, the actual name of it is The History of the Negro People in America by William Z. Foster. He's a white man, but he wrote this 500-600 page book on the struggle of Black people for freedom and Black nationalism. He refers to Black people as an oppressed and colonized nation in the United States, with the right to their own territory. It's amazing. Read anything William Z. Foster wrote. His history of the World Trade Union movement, his history of the three internationals, which I consider to be the most important, would you consider CPUSA today? More outerist. I would consider it to be government watch list unconstitutional. Anything he wrote is amazing. He led the Communist Party during McCarthyism, and then in 1956, as McCarthyism was starting to fade, you had the Khrushchev revelations, where Khrushchev, accused Stalin of being awful and, threw Stalin under the bus. And William Z. Foster defended Stalin, and he defended Stalin against Khrushchev. And he took the hardline position. And He was getting old. He was 80 years old. He was in the Soviet Union in the hospital, in his hospital bed in his 80s, getting ready to die. They took Khrushchev to meet William Z. Foster for his birthday. And when William Z. Foster met Khrushchev, he started talking about how amazing Mao was, and started lecturing Khrushchev on the Chinese Revolution and Mao and how amazing Mao was. At the time that Khrushchev had his falling out with Mao, William Z. Foster called out the head of state of the Soviet Union and defended Mao in the face of Khrushchev. And he died a few months later in the hospital at 80 years old, William Z. Foster. He died, and Khrushchev was so angry he didn't even come to his Soviet funeral, his state funeral. Brezhnev came, but Khrushchev didn't even come. William Z. Foster was a great hero of the American working class. He was a hardliner. He was a tanky. He was an anti-revisionist. He loved Stalin. He loved Mao. He organized the working class. He knew how to build unions. He was a militant. He was a radical. He fought against sellout leaders like Earl Browder. He was an amazing person, just an amazing figure. William Z. Foster, in so many ways, was just really a dynamic, amazing person. And I'm really, really glad to hear that he's been a source of inspiration. I'm going to put the link to my video on the life of William Z. Foster in the chat, right? Because I want you all to take the time to learn about who he was. I'm just dropping it in the chat right now. The legend of William Z. Foster. You should know who this man was. And I think it's really, really great to hear that he was an inspiration for the Amazon workers and their union struggle. I really think that's really just tremendous. I think it's really awesome. So there you go, folks. That's kind of everything I wanted to say in my opening remarks. So I guess we'll do the roll call. I'll call you out as I see you, names and locations. And then from there, we will start answering your super chat questions. So if you got more super chats, shoot them my way. Got a lot of them already. So there you go. All right. There we go. All right. Names and locations. I'll call you out as I see you. Names. We got Keaton in Virginia. Good friend of the program. JBV. Keaton. Awesome guy. We got Robert in Hawaii. We got Pierre in Montreal. Harold Sullivan in Naples, Florida. St. David, Bermuda. High Level, Alberta, Canada. David in China. We got Tristan in Maryland. David Fox in Bendigo, Australia. Don D in NYC. We got Ryan in Oakland. Sean in Florida. Carlos in Far, Texas. Marissa in Washington State. Brendan in Colorado. We got Mo in Toronto. We got Mindanao to Midwest, Olympia Logic. We got Sarajevo, Bosnia. Mo and Danielle in Pomona, California. We got Scott and Danielle in Pomona, California. Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati, great friend of the show. Detroit, Michigan. Arcata, California. Greenwood Lake, New York. West Point, New York. We got Marta in Poland. We got Madison, Wisconsin. John McCarthy in Chicago. We got Quebec to LA County, Nico P. Lisa in Bloomington, Indiana. I've been out there, Bloomington. Boone, North Carolina, Northern Lower Michigan, Alexis in Rochester, New York, Austin in Massachusetts, La Junta, Colorado. We got Alex Gunn in Boulder, Colorado. We got Ben, Slave Lake, Canada. We got Jim in Mendocino County, California. Zach in Richmond, Virginia. We got Terry from the Upper Peninsula. What do you think the significance of the Black Belt thesis? What do you think of the United States of Africa? All right, very good questions, right? Black Belt thesis, United States of Africa. Cool beans, great stuff. We got Greenville, South Carolina, Ian Nix. We got Nathaniel in Washington, New Bern, North Carolina, Zeneca, Bosnia, Chris in San Francisco. We got Chris Morlock, Iceland. We got Providence, Rhode Island, Emperor Tanky. We got Jesse in Baltimore. We've got, there you go. There you go. Good stuff, folks. Good stuff. We got Vegas. We got Kieran from San Diego. All right. Vancouver. We got Isaac in Vancouver. We got Theo, who's in Area 51. We got Micah in Las Vegas. Oh, boy. All right, everybody. I'm going to start answering these super chats. Is joining the International Criminal Court, as Ilhan Omar has proposed for the U.S. Congress, 1, a good thing? Or is it A, a good thing, B, a bad thing, or D, a distraction? I would say B, bad. Is that your final answer? Yes, I'm going to go with B. And you are correct for $1 million. Did you ever watch that? That hasn't been on TV for years. I'm dating myself. I'm old, right? That's the new thing. Even though I'm only 34, I'm an old man. And yes, when I was a kid, I watched Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? With Regis Philbin. And yes, the answer is B. It is a bad thing. The International Criminal Court sucks. The International Criminal Court is a horrendous institution. George Soros was one of the main promoters of it. And the International Criminal Court, it was formed in the aftermath. The first thing it did was the International Criminal Tribunal on Yugoslavia, which was horrendous, where they just started, going after all the leaders of Yugoslavia as they started dismantling socialist Yugoslavia. So that was horrendous. But then on top of that, after when it became the International Criminal Court, I believe every single one of the people that they have convicted, every single one has been African. Did you know that? Every single person that the International Criminal Court has convicted since they became the ICC, not counting when they were the International Criminal Tribunal on Yugoslavia, every single one of them has been African. It is a U.S. imperialist, Wall Street imperialist, NATO imperialist institution, and it's horrendous. And they use it to go after leaders in Africa. They use it to enforce their will, and it's a horrendous institution. And, Republicans don't like it because, in theory, any country that signs it, right, their people could be tried in the International Criminal Court. So Bush was against it because, in theory, U.S. soldiers or U.S. troops could be tried in, and occasionally they will make some noise against the United States for, terrorism or for torture, etc. But overall, the ICC is a bad institution. It is promoting a neoliberal agenda, and some of the people who are against it in the United States tend to be right-wing nationalists who they think it somehow messes with the sovereignty of the United States. Well, they're wrong. It's not, it's not messing with the sovereignty of the United States, but it's a bad institution. It is a bad institution. But a worker cooperative work at Amazon. Amazon, ? All right. So, yeah, I'm against the International Criminal Court. It is a neoliberal institution that is bad for working people, pro-imperialist. It's about colonizing Africa and regime change in the name of human rights. I am against the ICC. I am against it. So that is my answer to that question. Yes, that is my final answer. All right. Next question. Biden's imaginary handshake. Yeah, that's a little scary, isn't it? Yeah. Old Joe is out to lunch, and the only thing scarier is that if he were to step down, he'd be replaced by Kamala Harris, who is also out to lunch, but in a much more dangerous way. The only thing scarier than Joe Biden is Kamala Harris. Yes, Joe Biden, Sleepy Joe, and I think that, yes, Joe Biden is senile and out to lunch, but I think they're also using that to their advantage. They have him say things like they got to remove Putin from power and stuff, and then they have the deniability of, oh, he's old, he just says stuff like that. So yes, he is old. Yes, he is out to lunch, but also they can deliver threats and then back away from them. They can, so they're using him for those means. So there you go. All right, next question. Revolutionary Patriot versus Revolutionary Nationalist Alliance. I don't quite know what that means. Revolutionary patriotism is simply the idea that we love the country and with the people of the country. We want a better life here in the United States, but we understand that can only be done by dismantling capitalism and dismantling U.S. imperialism and moving towards socialism. That's the only way to make a better country. And if you truly love the country, you should be opposed to capitalism. Now, revolutionary nationalism, I think that generally refers to the nationalism of the oppressed nations, of Black people, of the Sun Belt and the Chicano people, of the indigenous Native American folks, and that there is revolutionary nationalism in the colonized world. I think that's what it means. It would be working with Black nationalists, and those who want to build a better country, who are socialists and are patriots, in an alliance with Black nationalists and Black freedom fighters. So I think that's what it's about. Is BreadTube the real Browderites? All righty. I think that's what it's about. So there you go. All right. And maybe it refers to the fact that the Black Panthers, when they formed their Rainbow Coalition, when Fred Hampton formed the Rainbow Coalition, in Chicago, one of the groups was a low-income white people gang called the Young Patriots. Now they used a Confederate flag as their symbol. I would never use the Confederate flag because it's a symbol of racism and slavery and the British Empire and genocide of black people and such. But yeah, there was a gang, a gang of low income whites in Chicago called the Young Patriots that aligned with the Black Panthers. So maybe that's what that refers to. I don't know. All right. Have I ever read Heidegger or Kant? Heidegger, I have read. Kant, I have not. And I don't find either of them to be inspiring. I'm not an ultra philosophy guy. I know the basics of philosophy, but Heidegger, Martin Heidegger, big important figure, and comes out of Germany and all of that, conservative revolution, etc. Kant, Immanuel Kant, not read Immanuel Kant. All right. War against white people in South Africa. There's no war against white people in South Africa. Give me a break. Give me a break. There is land redistribution going on, and actually legal, and this is an interesting point that a lot of people don't bring up, legal land redistribution in South Africa has cut down on farm raiding, right? After the fall of apartheid, and even before it, you had situations where there were, white farmers in South Africa who, they had their land or whatever, they owned their land, and a lot of the black people are very angry about the fact that their land was stolen by the colonizers, and they live in extreme poverty, etc. And so, in results of it, in response to that, someone asked me this last night, and I don't know enough about it, Dunkachino. But in response to that, there have been instances where, black people get together and raid the farms of white farmers in South Africa. Well, it's much better to just have a land redistribution program, because at the end of the day, that land, the fact that the land of Africa is owned by a bunch of white farmers, that's not good, right? And that the African people have a right to their land, right? And the white settlers, they don't have a right to own all the land of South Africa. And land redistribution in South Africa is a good thing. It's not a war on white people, right? I'm sorry, but there's been a war on black people in Africa for hundreds of years, and part of improving relations is giving the African people the right to their land. And so, I think what Robert Mugabe did, in Zimbabwe and getting rid of the settler state of Rhodesia and the hope that there might be land redistribution in South Africa, I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing. There needs to be, the fact that land is concentrated in the hands of white farmers and white owners, that's not a good thing, right? And that the African people who suffered under years of apartheid and colonialism, millions of them killed, they have a right to their land. So yeah, I mean, this person who's asking about a war on white people, there's not a war on white people. There's not a war on white people in South Africa. There is not a war on white people in South Africa. There is an effort to redistribute land. So there you go. There you go. Next question. Stacey Abrams' favorite book is Atlas Shrugged. Yeah, well, it's interesting because there's a lot of people who read Ayn Rand not because they like the politics. They just like the notion of a strong woman, and they view it as self-help. Ayn Rand is urging you to be selfish, to not think of anyone but yourself, to be, to be indifferent to other people's suffering, to view yourself as a great innovator who refuses to conform to society's wishes. And there's a lot of women, not just women, but men, but it's mainly men who like Ayn Rand, but women too, because she is a woman who they don't see it as about politics. They don't take it from it, the whole capitalism is freedom and capitalism is a great system. They take from it, this is a boss. She's a boss bitch who, doesn't, she's a boss babe. She's a boss bitch who doesn't let anyone mess her around. And that's what they take from it, right? That she's, a girl boss and she doesn't take shit from nobody. And that's probably what Stacey Abrams takes from it. I mean, there's somebody I worked with who was a Marxist who liked Ayn Rand. And I was like, how can you like Ayn Rand? It's like, oh, it's about women and it's about women being strong. And it's like, actually, the women in Ayn Rand novels tend to be very submissive. It tends to be about a man, right? I mean, she's a female writer, but the hero is always a man. Right, the hero is always a man, and and there's actually quite a lot of misogyny in Ayn Rand's novels. There's a rape scene, for Christ's sakes. I mean, there's in The Fountainhead, the hero, Howard Rourke, this great man who refuses to conform to society, breaks into the apartment of a woman and violently rapes her. And the narration of Ayn Rand portrays that as being somehow a good thing. So, I mean, she's not a feminist, but some people in their minds, because she's urging people to be selfish, because she was a woman and she was a writer, and she's urging people to be selfish, and they view that as somehow empowering or something. I assume that that's what Stacey Abrams likes about it. I don't know. I've never met Stacey Abrams, but her economics does not seem to be. She's not advocating Ayn Rand libertarian economics. She's very much an advocate of a welfare state to some degree or other. But it seems like she probably, in her life, has been very selfish. She's probably tried to get ahead in this world, and she probably, in her mind, she's probably an Ayn Rand protagonist who's been suppressed by other people, etc. So I would assume that that's what that's about. But it shows that at the end of the day, look, Leo Strauss, Ayn Rand is for dumb people, right? Ayn Rand is for the commoners. You and I get to read Ayn Rand. But for the Harvard and Yale class, there's Leo Strauss, right? Leo Strauss is Ayn Rand for the rich and for the well-educated and for the elites. Leo Strauss is the ideologue of the neocons. Ayn Rand is a novelist for small business owners and people, guys in business school, guys who go to business school and want to start their own company. That's who Ayn Rand is for. Ayn Rand is for guys in business school who want to start their own company and vote for Republicans and think that the free market will make them rich. And the only reason they're not rich is because of welfare recipients or something, right? That's who Ayn Rand is for. Ayn Rand is for dumb conservative bros. That's who Ayn Rand is for the elites, for the Harvard and Yale class, for Samantha Power and for Cass Sunstein and for Anne Marie Slaughter and for Susan Sontag. There's Leo Strauss and persecution and the art of writing and fascism. Right? Fascism is whenever the common people get together, and those of us who believe in freedom can decode Plato's writings and decode the writings of Immanuel Kant and understand that the great intellectuals have always been persecuted by the populists and by the rabble. And so we must manipulate the vulgar masses so they don't get together and take away the sacred freedom of the intellectual. Persecution in the Art of Writing by Leo Strauss. That's Ayn Rand for smart people. Ayn Rand is, the fountainhead, all that's for dumb people. That's for business majors and, guys who want to make a lot of money on Wall Street and etc. So there you go. Why do you think YouTube is dominant despite competing platforms? Because it's been around forever. And I mean, look, some of these alternatives to YouTube ain't so great, right? I mean, I've uploaded a lot of things to BitChute, and now I can't do it anymore because my files are too big. It won't take them. Odyssey is pretty cool. I'm on Odyssey. I use Rockfin. It's a great place to stream, and I'm on Rockfin. I would be on there tonight. I just forgot to set it up. One thing led to another. I was very busy before I did this live. One thing I was working on, and then another thing, and one thing led to another. And but there you go. Yeah. I mean, what was I saying? But yeah. So Rockfin's great. Odyssey's great. Rumble, I haven't used it that much. I put a few of my videos up on there, but so there's Rumble. But yeah, BitChute, I mean, I can't put my videos on there because the files are too large. I mean, that's just ridiculous. I worked hard to have more higher quality files, and then I can't put them up on there. So there you go. Yeah. So there you go. All right. A Marxist critique of nerd culture. Well, that's interesting. What is nerd culture? It's interesting, right? What is nerd culture? What is it, right? A lot of things that used to be considered nerd culture are actually very mainstream now. It used to be that if an adult, right? It was okay if you were a teenager, but if you were an adult and you were into Star Wars or Star Trek, you were a nerd. But now adults are always into Star Wars and Star Trek. It used to be if you were interested in anime, you were a nerd. But now, all kinds of 30, 40, 50, 60, 70-year-old people are into anime. A lot of things that used to be considered nerd culture, like anime, like Harry Potter, like what else? Star Wars, Star Trek, chess, a lot of nerd things are pretty mainstream now, and that's good, right? It means there's less bullying. It means that they're, letting people be themselves. But also, maybe it's not so good, because I mean, obviously I'm against bullying, and obviously I'm against anyone being bullied for their interests. But on the other hand, there's something kind of immature about such interests, right? I mean, if you're an adult man and you're into Star Wars and Star Trek, good for you. I mean, I respect that. But it used to be part of the reason that was frowned on was it was considered to be, well, you're an adult man, you should be raising a family, you should be getting a job and working hard. And there was kind of a feeling that's like a teenage thing. You're like stuck in your teenage years if you're an adult man who gets into that, right? And like for me, I mean, my parents wouldn't let me play video games. Which I think is a great thing. As much as I'm critical of my parents in a lot of ways, the fact they didn't let me play video games is one thing that's great because I developed an interest in communism and I read books and I learned like actual history and stuff. I didn't just play video games, but I mean, some aspects of nerd culture, anti-intellectualism has always disgusted me. It's always disgusted me. And, I mean, when I was in the Workers' World Party, I mean, this is a group of communists. This is a hardline, tanky communist party, supposedly. And, I mean, it had been started by a guy who was clearly a nerd. I mean, Sam Marcy, I just put up a video of him. If that man was not a nerd, I don't know what a nerd is. Listen to Sam Marcy. We're talking about the capitalists. I mean, Sam Marcy is like the definition of nerd. There's no one on earth who's ever been more of a nerd than Sam Marcy. I mean, he obscure Marxist intellectual who talked like this and was very short. And I mean, Sam Marcy was a brilliant man, but he was definitely a nerd, right? Why do exchange value render use value non-existent commodities? I'm not going to answer that. But anti-intellectualism has always bothered me, right? And I was in this group that was started by a nerd, and it was like, oh boy, we don't read books here, we're just interested in having rallies. And it was like, I used to call it the know nothing party because I was like, how are you guys not interested in Marxism? I mean, it was like you guys are a Marxist group, but there was this feeling that if you knew who William Z. Foster was, or if you knew who Gramsci was, you were just a big nerd, and we're not interested in that. We just have rallies here, and that always got on my nerves. So that's one way that I'm sympathetic to what you might call nerds. But the other thing, though, is that there's an element of kind of that victim celebrating, right? Bullying is an awful thing. It really is. I mean, and I'm really glad that they have taken measures to curb bullying in schools because bullying is awful. Bullying is really awful. Thank God they didn't have Facebook when I was in high school or Facebook when I was in elementary school. I mean, the bullying now, the computers have taken it to a whole nother level. People are just really nasty to each other. There's a lot of targeting and embarrassing and being mean to people, and that's not good. And we should raise kids to have empathy, to not target people, to not, do stuff like that. So that's good, right? And I had to go to pep rallies too, and I hated it. And there was this feeling that the football players were great people, and there's a lot of that. But at the same time, there's also on the other side, there's this feeling like, the nerd narrative that I got this my whole life, right? I got this my whole life. I heard this, that, oh, the nerds are going to be famous. The nerds are people who go someplace. And I mean, it's like, there's truth in that, right? The people that are smarter tend to achieve more in their life. But there is this kind of weird, like, I don't know, like, it's hard to explain, but you shouldn't want to be a nerd. Maybe. It depends what nerd means, right? If nerd just means knowing a lot of stuff and being intellectual, you should want that. If nerd means being very passionate about an intense interest that you have, you should want that. But if nerd means not being able to relate to other people, you shouldn't strive for that. If nerd means being antisocial, you shouldn't strive for that. You should be able to talk to people who are very different from you and relate to them and understand them. You should be able to engage with people. I mean, look, and that there is this kind of weird, like, we don't want to fit in with mainstream society. We want to be isolated, and that's not good, right? So there's aspects of and there's also kind of an element of we want to be teenagers for our whole life, right? We want to play video games and sit in our mom's basement for the rest of our life, and that's not a good thing either, right? There's nothing wrong with wanting to be a responsible adult. There's nothing wrong with wanting to actually go out and organize and get stuff done. So those are aspects of nerd culture I would disagree with, right? As I would say that it's good to, go out and get a job and have a family. It's good to, build real organizations, and that a lot of, what is nerd culture is kind of, it's really a tragedy. It's economics. Is that a lot of young people don't have the economic opportunity that once existed, and they're kind of stuck being teenagers their whole life, right? There's, they don't, the economic opportunity to get a job and go out on their own is not there. And they're kind of stuck in this toxic teen existence. They've been deprived of the dignity of adulthood. And nerd culture kind of, in some ways, is a result of that. The fact that it's so much more widespread now is a result of that. That adult people, adult men, adult women, it's more shameful for adult men because people expect us to be breadwinners. But it's difficult for women as well. You're stuck in this teen-like existence where you live off your parents until they die or whatever, and that's a very degrading experience for a lot of young men and women, and they feel like their family is judging them and says they're not good enough. They feel resentful of it. It's not a good experience, and and that feeds into, I think, the nerd culture is largely that's, if you're stuck living with your parents until you're, at least you can get really interested in Star Trek. At least you can get really into anime or Lord of the Rings or whatever. And that's, that's sad, right? And it's not their fault. They're not bad people for doing it. It's not their fault. But it's an economic reality. It's a side effect of the breakdown of capitalism. And it ought to be changed, right? We ought to have a situation where people can have the dignity of adulthood and people can know what it's like to have real responsibility and have a family of their own that they're supporting, etc. And that this trap, I think nerd culture and the explosion of it is the result of this trap that young people get into. And that, we should never be celebrating anything antisocial. Bullying has got to be gotten rid of. Bullying is awful. And whenever people are thinking like bullies, that's just a low place to be. Whenever you're getting your thrills by harming somebody else, not a good thing. Not a good thing. Not a good thing. So, yeah, there you go. Next question. Books on South African apartheid. There's a really good book called The Hot Cold War, the USSR in Southern Africa. And it's all about the role of the Soviet Union in aiding the struggle against apartheid in South Africa, against, the colonial settler state of Rhodesia, SWAPO in Namibia, different struggles in that region. So that's the book I would recommend, is The Hot Cold War, the USSR in Southern Africa. That's the book I would recommend there. That's a very good book. It's written by a former KGB agent describing the work that the Soviet Union did to aid the anti-colonial struggles. All right. Why not call the wokes the evangelical left? Well, evangelical just means you're out promoting your beliefs. That's what it means, right? That you're evangelizing. You're promoting your beliefs. And that's not the essence of what the problem is with them. The problem is their beliefs are bad, right? I'm all for people going out and spreading the message and leafleting and promoting their ideology. I am all for that. But if their ideology sucks, I'm not, right? The problem isn't that they're promoting what they believe. The problem is that what they believe is problematic. They don't believe in Marxism. They don't believe in class struggle. They want everyone to be poorer. They want to punish people for thought crimes. They think the problem is working people who aren't as woke as them and haven't taken gender studies at NYU. They don't think the problem is capitalism. And they think the answer is to morally shame people. And that's not what we need. David Fox, he said, we need working class power. And that is exactly what we need, is working class power. Absolutely. We need working class power. Chris Smalls is my hero. We need to defend Chris Smalls. We need to have a leaflet or something to defend Chris Smalls from the synthetic left. He is a hero, and we need to defend Chris Smalls. And we need to make clear the woke left, on the one hand, the woke left is going after him because he's standing up to Jeff Bezos, who is a promoter of woke leftism, owns the Washington Post. But on the other hand, they're trying to take credit for him. All these groups, these fake socialist groups that embrace wokeism, that call me a Nazi, call me a fascist, they're trying to embrace Chris Smalls. And it's like, no, you can't embrace Chris Smalls and AOC. You can't, right? You can't embrace Chris Smalls and AOC. You can't embrace Chris Smalls and the people calling him a Nazi right now. And we need to make clear that Chris Smalls is a hero, not just for having a heroic struggle against Amazon, but also having a heroic struggle against Jeff Bezos' fake socialists, right? And we ought to have literature about this, and we ought to find a way that every time there's an Amazon workers rally, we go there and we say, Chris Smalls and the Amazon workers are heroes, number one, for fighting Jeff Bezos, the billionaire exploiter who pretends to be a liberal and is a big part of the Pentagon political establishment and owns the Washington Post and the mainstream media, and two, for fighting the fake left that are working for Jeff Bezos and trying to protect Jeff Bezos from Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not the mainstream of the ruling class. He's one faction, but the main most powerful current of the ruling class is supporting Joe Biden right now. Jeff Bezos is part of the anti-Trump movement. Jeff Bezos, this is the real main danger, is the Anglo-American establishment, the old money ultra monopolists that want to drive wages down. And Amazon is a great example of that. And so there needs to be an alliance between Chris Smalls and the anti-woke left, because Chris Smalls, the fact that they're going after him, the fact he was willing to go on Tucker Carlson because he said out of the movement to the masses, we need to be with Chris Smalls. Chris Smalls is my hero. All right, next question. You said you're not a dogmatic ML. What criticism of ML do you have? Well, my criticism is mainly that most socialist countries in the world are trying to be more like China. You need a market sector. That Soviet style, the Soviet Union's model, is not eternal. It had great successes, and I will defend those successes. I will defend the achievements of the Soviet Union, defeating the Nazis, raising millions out of poverty, making Russia and China and Cuba and many countries, Libya, into industrial superpowers. But at the same time, that Soviet system has a problem. It has problems, and you need a market sector. You need, engineers. You need scientists. You need college professors. You need the kind of people that we call, quote unquote, middle class. You need them, right, to some degree or other. Maybe you don't want them to be exploiting the workers or mistreating society. You don't want them to be, in opposition to socialism. But Soviet style ML really argues you can nationalize everything. You can have everything be government owned. And no, in order to have a level of innovation, you need a market sector, I would argue, as part of building socialism. And that market sector must be controlled. But ultimately, you need a market sector to build socialism. And so that's my main criticism. The other thing is that, to some degree or other, I'm not a full-on straight materialist, right? I do think that ideas have power. I do think that some of the greatest people in history have gone against their own material interests for a cause they believe in. I do believe in God and a higher power. And so I'm not a strict ML in that sense, right? That overwhelmingly my view is dialectical and historical materialist. I understand the trajectory of human history. I understand material forces and the class struggle. And I understand, I think the Soviet Union had amazing achievements. But ultimately, I am not a dogmatic ML, because I don't think that the way Stalin did things is the way that we should just try to recreate over and over and over again. The Soviet Union happened once, and it had great achievements, just like the Paris Commune had great achievements. But China today is having great achievements, and Vietnam has had great achievements, and Cuba has had great achievements, and Nicaragua and Bolivarianism are having great achievements. Baathism is having great achievements. So, I'm not full on saying that doing everything exactly, the Stalin era ML ideology is exactly the way things need to be. I'm an eclectic anti-imperialist, an eclectic 21st century socialist. Marxism-Leninism is probably the biggest influence on my worldview, overwhelmingly. But I'm also influenced by Christianity, which is the religion I grew up with, and I've rediscovered my faith. I'm also influenced by, Islamic socialism and what I saw in Iran and the Shia revolutionary tradition. I'm also influenced, I would say, by Lyndon LaRouche and their movement. I've learned a lot from them, even though I disagree with them on some major points. I'm influenced by a lot of things. And again, my position is we should, as socialists in this time, we should study all of this stuff. We should know anarchism. I've studied anarchism. I've studied Sorel. I've studied Bakunin. We should study anarchism. We should study social democracy. I've studied Bernstein, right? I've learned a lot from Karl Kautsky, right? And his writings, Foundations of Christianity, The Class Struggle by Karl Kautsky. I've learned a lot from Karl Kautsky. Learned a lot from Rosa Luxemburg. We should know all of this, right? Rosa Luxemburg, Mass Strike is a very important document. And, her Junius pamphlet. We should know all of this stuff, but blindly follow none of it. Blindly follow none of it as we figure out a model that would work for our time. And that if you, for many years, that was my view, right? I had this view that I'll quickly go over. I mean, forgive me for sounding egotistical here. There's going to be some people on here that are going to roll their eyes and go, "We don't care, Caleb." That's fine. That's fine. You don't have to listen. But I'm going to quickly tell you my political development. Just quickly, tell you. It's funny. This book, it wasn't what I was looking for, From Brian to Stalin by William Z. Foster, because it's a political biography. There is very little personal information here in this book, right? William Z. Foster, right? It's basically every political group he's been in and what their political line was about and how he developed. It's not a personal memoir, right? And it's about how he was in the Bryan movement, and then the Socialist Party, and then the Wage Workers Party, and then the Industrial Workers of the World, and then the Syndicalist League of North America, International Trade Union Educational League, AFL, Meatpacking, and the Steel Campaign, the Red International of Labor Unions, the Communist International, the Trade Union Unity League, all the way to the Communist Party. I mean, it's very much a political biography, and that's important. You should trace how your politics develop. And that's one thing you should think about for yourself, right? How did your politics develop? When I was a kid, my family were the only Democrats in town, right? We were liberals. We were Democrats. My mom was a member of a union. She was a member of the Service Employees International Union. I walked the picket lines with her when I was a kid. I learned what a union was. And even though my mother is deeply religious, she was a union member. And I learned, and my parents took me to, they were boomers. They're into folk music. So I heard Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger and that kind of stuff. And I learned about, folk music, and there was kind of that folk music value. And so because of that, I had more of a liberal, kind of viewpoint when I was a kid, and the people I grew up around were evangelicals. All right. Red Army faction. All right. We'll talk about that. Red Army faction. They were more or less liberals. They were more or less liberals, and that was my view. But I got interested in communism, and for a while I was toying around with anarchism. I was toying around with democratic socialism. But really, after 9/11 and after the U.S. invasion of Iraq, things got really bad. Things got very, very, very bad. And, I was looking for something that would give me more clear answers. I needed clear answers about what was wrong, and so I got interested in, it was Maoist communists that seemed to have the answer. It was Maoist communists that had the strongest critique of U.S. foreign policy, that could explain imperialism the most. And was reading Maoist communist documents that talked about a global international system of imperialism, exploiting people in the developing world. Black Panthers were Maoists, and that was Maoist communists, that it was documents written by Maoist communists and all of that got me first, understanding the people in countries like Iraq and South America were fighting for their freedom against U.S. imperialism. So because, I read Trotskyite literature, and it was about, it was all bashing the socialist countries and bashing the Soviet Union, and they talked about labor unions and stuff. And, that didn't really speak to me. And I read stuff from the Communist Party, and it was all just about how Republicans were bad and Republicans are not any good. It was Maoist communists I read, and it was Maoist communists that, because of, the Vietnam War, and it was Maoist communists who were talking about U.S. imperialism. I was anti-imperialist. That was my first, that was what was important to me. And it was Maoist communists that introduced me to the Black Struggle and Mumia Abu-Jamal. And I used to listen to Mumia Abu-Jamal's broadcasts that he would do every day. Every few days, he would have a short radio message, and I would listen to Mumia. And because Maoist communists talked about it, I was interested in Maoist communism. when I was in high school, and then once I started getting interested in Maoist communism, it's like a rabbit hole, right? And so when I was a senior in high school, I read Black Bolshevik by Harry Haywood, and I learned about the Black Belt thesis and the Communist Party's history. And I read, I read Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism by Lenin. And, I got into Ward Churchill for a while because he talked about U.S. imperialism from like an indigenous perspective. And I was mainly opposed to U.S. imperialism, right? That was the main thing. I was opposed to the invasion of Iraq. I was opposed to, U.S. attacks on Libya and U.S. attacks on different countries. And so, that was the main way. But then when I started doing outreach, right, I was in this Maoist communist group, my first, year of high school, or my first year of college, I was in this Maoist communist group, and we were going out and selling newspapers. And I learned that the best way to win people to socialism, some of the future projects of CPI. All right. The best way to win people to socialism was with economic arguments, by talking about how everyone will have jobs and healthcare and things like that. And the Maoist groups that I was around, they didn't want to talk about that. They didn't want to talk about that kind of thing. They said, they didn't like the working class of the United States. They had this kind of third worldist view. They thought most of the workers in the United States were quote unquote bourgeoisified. They wanted to talk about police state repression against the Black community. And they were doing that way before it was trendy, talking about, the oppression and the police murdering people and et cetera. So I learned about that. And, I was involved in protests against police brutality back when not everyone was doing it, when it wasn't trendy to do that. But because I was interested in the workers' movement, because I was excited about Venezuela, because I supported the Iraqi resistance and their right to fight the U.S. occupiers who had, illegally invaded their country, I drifted closer to the Workers' World Party. And I was in the Workers' World Party for 8 years. And when I was in the Workers' World Party, they come out of the Trotskyist tradition. And one of the founders of the party, Frances Dostal, she taught me Trotskyism. And I read Revolution Betrayed, and I read... what else did I read? I read Revolution Betrayed, and I read In Defense of Marxism and Marxism in Our Time and The Permanent Revolution. And I got really into Trotskyism. And Trotskyism gave me a critique of the history of the Communist Party, a critique of some of the ways that the Maoist group had operated that gave me some sense, right? And with Trotskyism, you learn the actual history of the Comintern. With Maoist groups, they're just like, oh, the Comintern was good, and then there was Stalin. Moving on, and it's like, no, like, with the Workers' World Party, because they'd come out of the Socialist Workers' Party, I had to learn Trotskyism, and I learned about the third period, and I learned about the Popular Front, and I learned the Trotskyite critique of that, and I learned, the critique of the Comintern line on China, and I learned the critique of the Communist Party USA, and the transitional program, and all of that, I learned all of those things, right? So that was pretty cool. I learned that. And then, that's weird. People can't send super chats. That's really, really weird. That is really, really odd. That's disturbing. That's not good. What is going on with YouTube? That's not good. But anyhow, that's not good, right? If people are trying to send super chats and they can't, that's not good. Something's going on. Something's going on, and that's not good. That is not good, right? That is not good. So let's see. Have I been demonetized here? Are they coming after me? All right. Let's see what happens here. That's not good. But anyway, yeah. So, I got into that, and, I had to learn all of that. But then I never could really be a trot because the Workers' World Party weren't really Trotskyists. They weren't. I mean, when it really gets down to it, yes, super chats are going through. It's a little bit weird that they've selected some accounts, but that's pretty weird. Let's hope it's just a glitch. Thank you, Jamie Nix. I appreciate that. But yeah, that they're not really Trotskyists, and that you can't really support socialist countries. And be a Trotskyist, right? And I that was my main thing, is I supported the socialist countries against U.S. imperialism, and I supported even the oppressed countries like Zimbabwe, countries that that the Workers' World Party didn't consider to be socialist. I supported them against U.S. imperialism. You can't really do that if you're a Trotskyist. And I still loved William Z. Foster. I'd gotten into William Z. Foster's writing in high school, and I still loved, because he was approved by the Maoists because he'd been in the CP and been supporting China and against Earl Browder and defended China in the end and such. So, I got into that stuff. And, the Workers' World Party, around the time of the financial crisis, they really pushed their members to learn the history of the Communist Party. They fantasized that they could become like the CPUSA in the 30s and be leading mass workers' struggles. Of course, they weren't going to do that because they couldn't break with wokeism. But regardless, so I started reading the history of the, wow, everyone's just being so nice now. It seems to work. Thank you. And I appreciate it. But, I read the history of the Communist Party, and I started to realize that there was something wrong with Trotskyism, because it seemed like Trotskyism was just very negative. It was just very, very negative in relation to everything the Communist Party had accomplished. And I still loved William Z. Foster. And then I met somebody in the Workers' World Party who had been in the Workers' World Party for years, but came to anti-Trotsky conclusions. And all the friends of the Workers' World Party were anti-Trotsky. So after a while, after being in the Workers' World Party, after studying Trotskyism, I ultimately came to the conclusion that Trotskyism was no good. And you had to be quiet about that, because the Workers' World Party was thinking that they were the true Trotskyists. And it got frustrating because after a while being in the Workers' World Party, I realized they don't know what they believe. They don't know. I mean, they have no clue what they believe. Their beliefs do not make any fucking sense, right? Their beliefs, Sam Marcy, they make sense in his mind. Sam Marcy was the one true Trotskyist in the world. All the other people that read Trotsky misinterpret it. To be a true Trotskyist, you never quote Trotsky. You never emphasize Trotsky. You hang out with Stalinists. If Trotsky was alive, he would want you to pretend to hate him and be a Stalin. It doesn't make any fucking sense. And Trotsky was a petty bourgeois, and Trotsky screwed up here and he screwed up there. And Stalin was an opportunist, but he was a great organizer. It doesn't make any fucking sense, right? The last years after the time that the Soviet Union fell, Sam Marcy gave a series of classes on Stalin and Trotsky. It became clear they weren't Trotskyists, they weren't Stalinists, they were whatever the hell. They were all over the place, right? And and so I was in this group that thought they were Trotskyists but weren't really. And so I basically was turning against Trotskyism. And I was in the group, but I was going to be in the group, and I was going to follow the line, and I was going to do the best I could. But the group wouldn't grow, and 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 the group wouldn't grow. And I was recruiting people, and they wouldn't get through because they have this wacky authoritarian culture where they don't, other people weren't going to tolerate the abuse I was accused. I could describe some awful things. It's like every person who came around, they would accuse you of racism just to test you, and you weren't allowed to disagree with certain people. And a lot of the things they did, they couldn't tell you why they were doing them. It's just, that's what we do. That's the way we do things. And they're a dysfunctional organization. And the woke stuff was getting started as I left. And I left because my career was taking off. I was doing journalism. I was working with Press TV. I was working with RT, and my career was taking off, and these folks, they weren't really, there wasn't really a place for me in the work that they were doing. They weren't expanding. They were a dying organization. But there was work for me elsewhere. And so it was just kind of like, okay, we parted ways. And I tried to leave on good terms. I tried to be friendly, but they couldn't do that. Oh no, it had to turn into, whatever. And they started spreading rumors about me and attacking me on the internet. So then it turned ugly, even though I tried to leave on good terms. And my views were changing. I was becoming, I felt Libya was a socialist country. And at the time that Libya, that the fall of Libya in 2011 was going on, they couldn't convince me Libya wasn't socialist. None of them could make a coherent argument about why it wasn't socialist, right? It wasn't socialist because, Sam Marcy said it wasn't socialist before he died a long time ago. They couldn't make a coherent argument. So based on that, I was kind of on my own. And I went to Iran. I spent a lot of time in Iran, and I learned about the Islamic tradition. And I visited Venezuela. I went to the Bolivarian countries. I learned about Bolivarian socialism. And I studied different, histories and stuff. And then as the 2016 elections happened, I realized, we're having a political nightmare here. Donald Trump was awful, but he was saying things that the left should be saying, like fighting for working families. The left hated the working class and thought they were a basket of deplorables. And I realized I needed to start doing my own thing again. I needed to start organizing. So I did, and I started working with people who set up the Students and Youth for a New America clubs, and one thing led to another. We did these broadcasts, and then after these broadcasts, we ended up doing CPI, and one thing led to another, and that's my political development, right? And it's been a long process. I had to be a Trotskyist to learn what was wrong with Trotskyism. I had to be a Maoist to learn what was wrong with Maoism, right? And I had to learn the great achievements of the Communist Party. And I realized, I came to the conclusion, I'd been in the Workers' World Party for a while, and I remember I came to the conclusion there were only two communist groups in the United States that mattered, in U.S. history. Only two. The Communist Party USA, they mattered from about 1920, in the 1920s until about the 1950s, they mattered, right? And they briefly mattered in the 70s, but not really. And so if you're interested in communism in the United States, that's a group you ought to study, because they were huge and they made a huge difference in the labor movement. They made a huge difference in the unemployment councils. And the Black Panthers. The Black Panthers were around very briefly, right? From like 1966 up until like 1982. They were, and they really kind of lost their strength. They started losing strength very rapidly in the mid-70s, but they mattered. The Black Panthers mattered. Fred Hampton mattered. Elaine Brown, the first female leader of the Black Panthers, Huey Newton, Bobby Seale, they fucking mattered. And so if you're interested in being a communist in the United States, study the IWW and the Wobblies, but that's so old, you're not going to get much from it. That's before the Russian Revolution. Study Eugene Debs, that's important. Study Huey Long. He wasn't a Marxist or a communist, but he was an important leader who, challenged the power structure and built a working class movement, etc. But ultimately, if you want to be a communist in the United States, there's only two groups that fucking matter. The Communist Party until the 50s and the Black Panthers. Those are the only groups that really have had an impact in American history that are communist, that are Marxist-Leninist. Those are the only two ML groups. Every other group, Socialist Workers Party, they did like one good thing, okay? They did, the Teamsters Union. They organized the Teamsters for a few years in the 1930s. That was pretty good, and then they got kicked out, and then they went to a whole bunch of prison during World War II, and then they became an irrelevant trot group. The Revolutionary Communist Party, they sold a lot of newspapers. They did a lot of cussing and screaming. They marched around with red flags and screamed at people. They got flag burning legalized by the Supreme Court. They don't fucking matter. There's very few communist groups in the United States that have really had much of an impact. And only two of them really had a very significant impact. One, the CPUSA until the 50s. Two, the Black Panthers. That's it. That's really it. So if you really want to understand communism, those are the two groups you need to study. And I came to that conclusion. And so I started reading everything I could about those two groups. And I studied, I've got a lot of books on the Black Panthers. The best one I ever read is We Want Freedom by Mumia Abu-Jamal, but Black Against Empire is a great book. The writings, the memoirs of the Panthers, they're great books, they're great. And I studied everything I could. William Z. Foster, the history of the Communist Party, Nelson Peary, Black Bolshevik, all that stuff's really important. The new communist movement, the NCM, that was Maoists in the 1970s before they got into like third worldism, when they were actually trying to organize the working class of America. And that's interesting, but it failed. And it's interesting to read about why it failed. But it failed. It's a really depressing history, because you're reading the history of people who pretty much failed, with the exception of Detroit, right? They got Coleman Young elected, and they had a lot of significance in Detroit, But other than that, they pretty much failed, right? The new communist movement was a pretty big flop. It was coming out of the 60s, 1969 to about 1982. You had a large number, thousands of American Maoists divided up into a bunch of factions who tried to organize a new communist party, and they were trying to do the right thing, but they failed. And it's interesting to read about why they failed, but they failed, right? They ultimately failed. So, I don't know. I came to that conclusion, and I don't know. Anyway, I guess I was rambling about my own development. We got a lot more super chats to answer, so let's get to the next one. All right. Next question. Is the sex offender registry unconstitutional? No. I don't think so. Right? If people commit a crime. If you commit a crime, you lose your rights. Right? That's generally how it works, right? If you commit a crime, the way it works is if you are convicted of a crime, things that are your constitutional right can go away. But only if you're convicted of a crime, right? Like, for example, it's very hard to say that somebody who's on the terrorism watch list can't own a gun, right? All right, define third worldism. All right. It's very hard to say that someone on the terrorism watch list can't own a gun. Why? Because just being on a watch list is not a crime, right? You're not convicted of a crime. If they put you on the terrorism watch list, that just means they're watching you. They're suspicious of you. You haven't committed a crime. And if something is your constitutional right, like free speech, like freedom of religion, they can't take it away unless you break the law. Right? And in the United States, the Supreme Court says that owning a gun is on the level of free speech and freedom of assembly. So, if you break the law, then they can take away your right to own a gun because you have broken the law. And if you break the law, your freedom of religion can be taken away. They say you can't leave the jail and go to church. Can't leave the jail and go to church because, they got to have church in the jail because you broke the law. And no, you can't talk back to the warden because your freedom of speech went away when you broke the law. And that's generally how these things work, right? Is that if you break the law, you can lose your freedoms. But unless you are convicted of a crime, your freedoms can't be taken away. So having a sex offender registry, if you are convicted of a sex crime, if you are convicted of molesting somebody or convicted of sexually assaulting somebody and are a sex offender, having you on a list of people who've committed that crime is not illegal. Just like it's not illegal to have lists of people who are convicted of terrorism. Now you can argue that it's problematic, that don't people deserve a second chance, etc. But that's not a legal argument. That's not a legal argument. That's just like a moral argument and appeal to consequences. But no, the sex offender registry is not illegal. It is not illegal. All right. It is not unconstitutional. And I'm not a constitutional scholar. And I also am not a blind defender of the U.S. Constitution, right? The U.S. Constitution says that black people are 3/5 of a human being. I think as part of the process of building socialism, we're probably going to have to write a new constitution eventually. But I'm just based on what I know about the U.S. Constitution. No, I don't think it's illegal. I don't think the sex offender registry is illegal. Next question. All right. The Don't Say Gay bill. Look, I heard about it and I was like, what? It was actually my wife who told me about it because my wife, she's on social media and she said, oh, there's a lot of people. It was while I was in Texas. I came back and my wife said, what did you hear about the Don't Say Gay bill? And she showed me a video of like kids protesting against it and saying gay, gay, gay and protesting against it. And I said, well, that's weird. Like, what is this law? It doesn't even make any sense to me. What is this? They don't, it's like they're outlawing saying gay in a school. What is this, right? My teachers said gay all the time when they were giving us lectures on why we needed to, why we needed the Bible and why America was going to hell. They said gay is wrong. And my teachers were preaching gay, this, gay, that at us all the time. And it's this new liberal thing, the Don't Say Gay bill, they're calling it, and it's in Florida. And so I looked into it. And all that it is that children under 12, not all people in public schools, but children under 12, the teachers can't have discussions in class with children under 12 about homosexuality or gender identity and all of that. Well, you know what? I cancel me for saying it. Should children under the age of 12 be having discussions about that kind of thing? No. I don't think that in school for children under 12, you obviously want to give them basic sex education, reproduction. You obviously, you don't want to bully any kid who's gay or make him feel like he's not welcome, or you don't want to be preaching hate for gay people in school or saying that gay people are all child molesters and evil. But I don't think the children under 12, the teachers should be telling children under 12 what to think about homosexuality. Their parents can talk to them about it. I was in a town where, my family were the only liberals on the block. And my teachers were always telling us about how gay marriage was evil and how, homosexuals were evil and we needed the Bible and school shootings were happening and I felt very alone and threatened because my school was giving me a lecture on that issue that was threatening, and my family were liberals. Well, how do you think, Orthodox Jewish kids or Roman Catholic kids or or evangelical Christian kids or Muslim kids, how do you think they feel when their teachers preaching at them about gay rights? And they're under the age of 12, for Christ's sakes. Now, older than 12, teenagers, yeah, you got to be able to talk about these things. Teenagers, sure. High school, you ought to be able to have a class discussion about should gay marriage be allowed? Should we, you ought to be able to talk about that thing in high school. But under 12, saying that under 12, they shouldn't have school lessons for children under 12 about homosexuality and gender identity. I think that's okay. That's fine. 12, at that point, that's a conversation you should be having with your parents. After you're 12, yeah, you can have it with your classmates. You can have it led by your teachers. But under 12, yeah, I don't have a problem with it. I really don't. It's one thing to, if they were preaching at these kids that it's wrong to be gay, I'd be against that. If they were preaching at these kids, but just saying until they're 12, we're not talking about it. I'm fine with that. I mean, unless I'm misunderstanding something, it's possible that I don't have the whole story because often this happens, right? Right-wing media, Fox News, they are notorious liars and they will often misrepresent things. But the liberal argument I've heard about it where they have some teacher and he's like, I'm gay and I can't tell my kids I went kayaking. I went boating. I can't tell my kids I went skiing with my boyfriend because, well, I mean, should you be telling your 12-year-old class you went? I mean, really? I mean, I don't know. Maybe you should say with my spouse and they won't know. I mean, I don't think that's what the law is either. I don't think it says that. I think it just says, based on my understanding of the law, it's just that, yeah, you can say me and my spouse went kayaking this weekend. Me and my spouse, went fishing this weekend, but you can't go and we're homosexuals, kids. What do you think about homosexuality? Let's have a big, long class discussion about it. And maybe that's not right. Maybe kids under 12 should be talking about that with their mom and dad and should be talking about that, with a religious leader. That's what it sounds like to me. I mean, I just feel like, again, under 12, you shouldn't be, having big discussions with kids about really controversial culture war issues at that age. And that, when they're a teenager, yes. But it's kind of best left up to the parents, right? I mean, what's so hard about that? Because it's like these people don't understand that okay, that yes, so now in a lot of places, everyone's in favor of LGBT rights. I grew up in a town where they weren't. And I was constantly being bombarded with gays are wrong and we need the Bible and George W. Bush is protecting America from the terrorists and people marching against the war are traitors to this country and they should all be shot. And I didn't like that. I didn't like hearing that. And I didn't think it was right that in my public school where I was paying taxes, I was getting bombarded with right-wing propaganda. So why should I want kids who were Muslim or Christian or Jewish to get bombarded with left-wing propaganda on a culture war when they're not 12 years old yet? I'm sorry. I mean, yeah, I mean, tell me where I'm wrong here. I'm open to hearing the other side of it. I don't trust the right wing. I don't trust Fox News. Don't trust Candace Owens. I don't trust Tucker Carlson. This seems like to me on this issue, under 12, your teacher shouldn't be giving you a lecture on homosexuality. I mean, is this too much? I'm trying. Convince me I'm wrong. But I think under 12, your teacher should not be teaching you about homosexuality, about gender identity. Maybe you need the facts of life. You need to know where babies come from. You need to know that you shouldn't be molested. Good touch, bad touch, that kind of thing. But beyond that, wait till you're older. And I guess this is not a popular opinion. This isn't trendy on the left. But it's at the end of the day, it's not something I'm going to get up in arms about. I would never protest about this. This isn't a priority. I don't like culture wars. I really don't like culture wars. And if you are opposed 100% to the Don't Say Gay bill, you're still my comrade, right? If you are in favor of it and you say no, this bill is awful, and you're still my comrade. I would never. This is not the dividing line for me. At the end of the day, if you think the Don't Say Gay bill is a big problem and you're against it, I respect you. And if you are like me and you think, okay, at the end of the day, this isn't what I get fired up about. I don't want to talk about the Don't Say Gay bill. I don't want to talk about, I want to talk about socialism. I want to talk about economics. I want to talk about opposing the wars. That's what I'm about. I am about fighting for the working class and the class struggle, and I am about anti-imperialism. And they're the same thing, because the economic system we live under in the United States is imperialism. The capitalists of the United States are the capitalists who exploit the whole world. I am for fighting for the working class against the imperialists. That's what I'm for. And if that, if you like the Don't Say Gay bill or you're against it, it doesn't matter to me. There you go. I don't even know what to say. So yeah, again, it's funny. Usually, if they cancel me for something, it's at the beginning of my streams, because the people who like me, the people who like to cancel me, the people who like to hate me, they don't actually want to watch me. They're not interested in actually hearing what I say. So like, what is this? Of course they are. Who says they're not? Of course they are. I would be the first. If you said I'm going to ban gay people from my organization, or I'm going to bully gay people, or I'm going to discriminate against them, I'd be against that. I'm for the rights of LGBT people. No one should be bullying them or denying them the right to marry or denying them equal rights. I'm in favor of gay marriage and all of that, but maybe I'm also in favor of waiting until kids are 13 to have conversations about it at school. Like, I see, how am I denying that they are people? And how am I denying that they're part of the working class? I'm not doing that, and that's that's how these things work. Right. And it's like, again, I just there you go. Anyway, and see, that's where the debate always goes. It always goes to, well, you're denying someone's humanity. I'm not denying anyone's humanity. I'm saying that certain issues should probably wait until the kid's 13. And it's like, yeah. And there you go. There you go. All right. Next question. Is the CPUSA of today Browderist? Not really. Browderism is a specific deviation. It's a specific deviation. Dissolved the Communist Party, had the Communist Political Association, said U.S. imperialism was progressive in Latin America, said that there should be no more strikes, that the capitalists and the workers have a common interest. I don't know. The CPUSA of today is pretty lame, but I don't say Browderist. No. Not Browderist. That's not what I would say. Are government watch lists unconstitutional? No. If they're just watching you, right? Police surveil people. They have lists of people they surveil. So yeah, as much as, a lot of the espionage that, if they search your home without a warrant, right? If they tap your telephone without a warrant, that's illegal. That's unconstitutional. But just having a list of people who might be suspicious, every police department in the world, in every country, capitalist or socialist, they have a list of people they are suspicious of. That's how it works. So I don't think that's unconstitutional either, right? Again, you're not punishing these people without due process. You're not violating their right to unlawful search and seizure. But if there's certain people that are people to keep your eye on, that's just kind of how policing agencies work. And they often do it for bad reasons. They have lists of potential subversives and such. But, at the end of the day, yeah, there you go. All right. The Black Belt thesis. The Black Belt thesis, I liked it. The idea that African Americans in the United States, the descendants of slaves that are concentrated, even still today, their highest concentration of population is in the Black Belt, that they constitute a nation. And as a nation, they have the right, because they have a common language, they have a common territory, because they have a common heritage and a common culture, common religious groups, and a common experience being in the United States. Because of that, they have a right, if they choose, we're not saying they should, but if they choose, they have the right to separate from the United States. I think that's correct, right? Just like I would be for the right of any oppressed group, their right to separate if they choose to separate. For the people of Donbass. The Russian-speaking people of Eastern Ukraine have chosen to separate from Ukraine, and I respect their right to self-determination, and I'm glad Russia is moving in to protect them. The Donetsk people and the Lugansk people, they want the right to separate. They say we have a separate language. We speak Russian. We don't speak Ukrainian. We feel we're oppressed. We have chosen separation, and Russia is now protecting their right to self-determination. And if the black people of the United States, if they chose, I would not go around telling them to do this. I would never do that because it would sound like segregation. But if the black people of the United States wanted to have an independent black republic in the Black Belt, I would support their right to do it, but only if they chose that, right? And that's what the Black Belt thesis says. I think it's ultimately correct, right? That self-determination should be granted to the descendants of slaves in the United States. I think that's correct. United States of Africa. Well, many Pan-Africanists, I mean, that's Pan-Africanism, right? That's Kwame Nkrumah, that's Gaddafi, that's Robert Mugabe. Many of the African leaders have said that the reason that part of the reason Africa is kept oppressed is because it's kept poor, and that forming a United States of Africa, would be a step towards having a stronger, economically stronger and more independent Africa. So if the African people wanted that, I would be for it. I wouldn't go to Africa and say, hey, I'm a white guy and I think you should all be one country. I wouldn't do that. It's a question of self-determination, right? This is ultimately the Black Belt separation. The Black Belt thesis just means they have the right to it. And I mean, I agree they have the right to it. But the actual separation or the formation of the United States of Africa, this is up to the oppressed people. They have the right to decide that for themselves. So there you go. Next question. Would a worker cooperative work at Amazon? Well, if that would mean profit sharing, that the employees would reap some of the profits, sure, that would work. Yeah, I mean, why not, right? If instead of Jeff Bezos being the individual owner, if all the employees were to get a share of the profits, that could be done, right? A profit sharing enterprise if Amazon were to start functioning like Huawei Technologies, that could work. Why not, right? I'm not against that. Are BreadTube the real Browderites? No, wokeism is very different than Browderism. I mean, Browder at least wanted wages to go up. Browder at least pretended to be a champion of the broad masses of people. The thing is, Browder wasn't against imperialism. Earl Browder wasn't against imperialism, and he kind of watered down Marxism to accommodate being pro-imperialist. But even he wanted living standards to go up. Even he, didn't think the average Americans were the enemy. BreadTube is a different brand. The synthetic left is a different brand of deviation. All right. The Red Army faction. Why was stuff like that so common in the 70s? In Germany, this group they call it Baader Meinhof, but they called themselves, it was after two people. They called it the Baader Meinhof gang. It was a terrorist group in Germany, an ultra-left adventurous terrorist group. But they called themselves the Red Army faction. And I think one of them is in prison still in Germany and is like an anti-Semite, actually, has become like an anti-Semite and a Holocaust denier. Basically, yeah, they were this armed group, and they existed, and they were kind of like the Weather Underground, kind of like the Japanese Red Army, kind of like the Red Brigades in Italy. And yeah, they committed kidnappings and bombings and assassinations. And why was that so common back then? Well, it was so common back then because there had been a big political upsurge against the Vietnam War, and there had been, communism was rising around the world. But in the first world countries, in the United States, the economy was still booming, and it was still very strong. The post-World War II economic expansion had just come to an end. You still had a big aristocracy of labor. And because of that, you couldn't build a mass working class organization. The broad masses of workers in the United States and in Britain and in France and Germany, the broad masses of workers were not Marxists, were not revolutionary. Their conditions were so that they weren't open to revolutionary politics. So because of that, people said, okay, if we can't organize the broad masses of workers, what can we do? Well, we can be terrorists, right? We can feel good about ourselves, and we can feel excited, and we can commit illegal activities and feel like martyrs, and we can go to jail. Well, you don't really change things. Terrorism does not work, and revolutionaries reject left adventurism. But it was a response to hostile circumstances. It was a response to the fact that you weren't able, under those conditions, to build a broad, organized workers' movement against imperialism. So people thought, well, they can cheat, right? They can jump ahead and that they can just organize themselves, right? And they can engage in left adventurism, and that'll be their way they can do something. And no, I mean, you have to organize the broad masses. And when the conditions are such that that's hard to do, it can be very demoralizing and frustrating. That's part of the what I talk about with the new communist movement of the 70s. The new communist movement of the 70s, they had, they were very demoralized and frustrated. And it was in this time, the 70s, you had Bader Meinhof. They emerged, and it was like, okay, we can't organize the broad masses of people, so we're going to be left adventurous terrorists. So there you go. And then on top of that, so you have people engaging in that kind of activity because you can't build a broad workers movement. That's the first part of it. Then the next part of it is that the intelligence agencies manipulate those people and they become kind of tools, right? If they want to attack one faction of the ruling class against another. And so the deep state started using those groups, right? And those groups became vehicles for one faction of the deep state to threaten another faction. Read about Operation Gladio, how the CIA funded like ultra left adventurist communists in Italy to fight against the Communist Party. And they funded fascist groups to also fight against the Communist Party and to fight against the left adventurous terrorist groups, and how the Red Brigades were getting supported covertly by the CIA, and how fascist groups were also getting supported, and all kinds of things were going on, and the covert kind of manipulation of what they call non-state actors that goes on. So people were coming to the conclusion that you needed to be an ultra-left adventurous terrorist, which is, it was based on frustration with the circumstances. And then on top of that, the deep state was saying, okay, we can use this, and using these people to do their dirty work and threaten other factions of the ruling class. All right. Future projects of the CPI. Well, we're having meetings around the country. We had our first public rally. It was a big success. We're hoping to do another one in Chicago soon. We're hoping to do one in Seattle soon. We're having our national gathering June 22nd through 26th. Location to be announced. That'll be for members only. It's not a public event. We're having our national gathering, like a 4-day training school for members of the CPI. We're doing a lot. We have reading groups that are organizing. We have outreach campaigns. We've got a lot of different plans of things to do as our organization grows. But the main thing is we're a think tank. We're not an activist group. We don't go around, we might have a rally here or there for Alex Saab or something like that. But at the end of the day, we're trying to provide the ideology that can lay the basis for the fight back that's coming, right? We promoted William Z. Foster. We've been promoting William Z. Foster all this time. And look, now the Amazon organizers, they picked up something we've been promoting and they used it to win their great victory. That's the kind of thing CPI wants to do. We want to start the conversation. We want to insert the ideas out there. We are very much an organization that is dedicated to getting ideas out there. So, and spreading concepts among the population, changing the consciousness. We're an educational organization, right? That will inspire and lay the basis for what's coming. The fight back is going to come, but we are going to provide the ideology that can make that fight back something good. Define third worldism. Third worldism is a deviant form of Marxism-Leninism that says that the workers in the first world countries, in the United States, and Britain and France, Germany, etc., that they are the exploiters, not the capitalists. That the first world working class, they are the ones, they benefit from imperialism, and they are the enemy. That's what that is, and it is incorrect, right? The working class in the first world, yes, they benefit from imperialism to some degree or other, but they are not the enemy. The enemy is the imperialists, and the destiny of the workers in the first world is to align with the third world against imperialism. All right, folks, it's been a long night, so we're gonna end it here. There we go. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. All right, everybody. The danger of a new world war still exists. People of all countries must get prepared. But revolution is the main trend in the world today.